Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to edition 74 of the Food Safety Fridays webinar program. It's fantastic to be back after a couple of weeks away. We're raring to go. Today's subject is conducting internal audits with Alma Sue Hyduke from AIB International. Obviously, internal audits is a vital ingredient of any food safety quality management system, and they are extremely important for identifying non-conformances and opportunities for improvement before maybe a customer, external, third-party audit finds them. So it's really important to have a good, effective internal audit system. So whether you're managing an internal audit program or you're a member of a team, welcome today. Today's webinar and the Food Safety Fridays webinar program is sponsored by Metal Toledo, Safe Food 360, Trace Analytics, and AIB International this year. And Alma Sue Hyduke is from AIB International, our kind sponsor. So I'd like to introduce you at this point to Alma Sue. If you can turn your webcam on. Hello, Alma Sue. Nice to have you with us.
Hello, Simon. It's nice to be with you as well. Thank you.
Okay, and can you tell the ladies and gents where you're dialing in from today?
Yes, I'm actually dialing in from my residence, which is in Texas. So I'm currently in the Panhandle of Texas. We often refer to it as the top of Texas.
Top of Texas, right? And what's the actual place within Texas then? Just for information.
So if we want to relate it to a city, it would be Amarillo.
Amarillo. Is
yes,
this the way to Amarillo?
Yes, it's the closest city to me.
I won't sing. Right, and I'm from Manchester, everybody, as you may know, Manchester in the UK. Okay, Alma, so if you want to put your slides up, I'm just going to talk about next week's webinar. Okay,
great.
Right, ladies and gents, in the sidebar, I've loaded Amanda, How to Avoid Stupid Audit Non-Conformances. That's going to be a great webinar. Amanda's very practical and quite amusing, actually, so she'll have some great ideas. So register there. Remember, today's webinar is being recorded. We send the slides and the recording afterwards. I'll be with you for the Q&A afterwards, and also we'll be having some polls, so I will be joining in with those. But for now, over to Alma Sue.
So for me, it's good morning, but I realize good afternoon, good evening as well. As Simon said, I'm Alma Sue Hyduke, and prior to joining AIB, I worked in the industry for 15 years, where I actually participated in internal auditing programs, both at the site level as well as at the corporate level, as either a participant or the coordinator of the audit team. So I'm hoping that through that experience, I'm able to share with you a little bit of what I found to be important to the internal auditing process. And the nice thing today, I actually get to work with AIB's food safety professionals to help them build their skill sets related to auditing. Many of the principles that we'll share today is what we focus on within AIB. As we get started, I know that many of you have seen a lot of these issues in the news. We have peanut butter that came up in the news several years ago, which attributed to salmonella poisoning that resulted in 714 illnesses and 9 deaths. We had cantaloupe that was being produced on a farm that had listeria contamination, and it resulted in 147 illnesses and 33 deaths. There was also a worldwide contamination of melamine found in pet food, which resulted in the largest pet food recall worldwide, and caused death due to kidney failure in these animals that ate that pet food. Another recall that took place was with apple juice, where there was traces of arsenic found in that juice. And as many of us know, apple juice is consumed by children. We also have many retailers that have actually stopped selling sprouts because sprouts have had several recalls related to various micro contamination. And then the last item that I have on the screen is a picture of raw cookie dough, which was linked to pathogen E. coli and resulted in 77 reported illnesses. The company who actually produces this particular cookie dough has started using heat treated flour to help mitigate the risk associated with that particular pathogen. So as we begin to really look at risk mitigation, and work through reducing risk within our organizations, we really want to stop and ask, what type of food are we producing? Who are our consumers? Is it the immunocompromised, the young, the old, or is it your average individual? Is your product ready to eat, or does it require further processing? And what type of hazards are common to this particular product? In some of the examples of what we were looking at for food recalls, no one really thought listeria would be associated with cantaloupe coming out of a field. But if we look at the nature of that particular organism, we know that we can find it in nature. So those are all players within that risk mitigation. And then last but definitely not least, we want to take a look at our procedures and processes, because this is actually the most important aspect of our food safety program. And the reason that I bring up these factors as risk mitigation, because it really does lead into gaining that understanding of how the interaction of our internal auditing process, of our procedures and processes, are linked to our corrective action programs, and how it plays a fundamental element within our management review process as a form of risk management. And really, that's our focus for our objective today. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the audit principles that are related to the ISO 19011 standard, and how that standard is used within the GFSI standards as kind of the foundation of an internal auditing program. Then I'm going to spend quite a bit of time actually talking about an internal auditing program, as well as how that internal audit program links to corrective actions and management review. If we begin to take a look at our ISO 19011 system, this particular system is the fundamental guidelines of an auditing management program. The International Organization of Standards is an international creditable organization that is non-government based with respect to membership. And it develops voluntary standards, which basically means that voluntary means you do not have to follow the standard, but they have standards that are linked to almost all aspects of industry or services for that matter. And each one of these actually are used as a fitness for use or best practice within a particular industry. So some of the examples is the ISO 9000 series, which is quality management. We have 14,000 for environmental management, OSHA 18,000 occupational management, ISO 22,000, which is the food safety management system. And really, at the end of the day, these standards are used by either independent or even accredited third-party audits to help challenge our industries for that fitness of use and determine where they lie within that. Now, when we take a look at just the auditing principles for 19011, the fitness for use is centered on integrity and treating people with a level of professionalism when they're being audited. It's centered on facts and objective evidence rather than on feel or perception. So again, truthful evidence. Once that evidence has been collected, then you want to make some kind of judgment. Is it a critical a nonconformance? Is it a minor nonconformance? Or is the health of the system really good and strong, meaning you don't have any nonconformances? And we always want to make sure that that audit is maintained in a confidential standpoint. If you have a third party auditor come in, you always want to make sure that they have that sense of confidence and not share trade secrets. We also want to maintain that within our internal structure as well. And then we also want to make sure that the auditor is independent of the activities that are being audited, because that actually helps alleviate any biases that may be created. The ISO 19011 audit principles are also found in the underlying standards within the Global Food Safety Initiative. Now, what I mean by that is when the British Retail Consortium, BRC, or the Safe Quality Food Standard, which was developed out of Australia, we have the FSSC 22000, which is based on the ISO principles, and then we also have the International Featured Standards that originated in Germany. These are really our top four main audit standards found globally within GFSI, as well as many others that are linked to very specific industries such as meat, aquaculture, or farms growing crops. All of these have that underlying principles of the 19011 guidelines that are created through ISO. So when we talk about an internal auditing program, it should always be based on risk. And your schedule should reflect the risk-based concepts or ideals that you have within your organization. A lot of those risks are associated with your HACCP and your prerequisite program, so naturally those fall into the internal auditing program. We also have the GMP aspect of it through observation of equipment, building, operations, and personnel. When we develop our audit team, we want to make sure that those individuals have the correct training, that they have a competency to conduct audits, and that they're independent from the activity that they're actually auditing. Within the scope of the audit team, we want to be able to identify conformance as well as non-conformance within our organizations. And this requires corrective action and verification of those non-conformances that were identified. And a very important element to the whole entire auditing process is the management commitment that goes along with auditing and establishing the communication as well as the resource commitment to perform the audits that have been outlined within your organization. And naturally, with any program we have, we always want to make sure we have records to demonstrate all of those items within our auditing program. So if we want to take a look at the holistic ideals or policy of an internal auditing program, we want to look at what is the scope. Now, earlier in the presentation, I stated that we have the quality systems, we have environmental, and we have IT auditing programs out there. And yes, you can incorporate food safety into one master auditing program within your organization, or you can leave it independent. And that really depends on your organization, the size of your organization, and where you want to take it. For the purposes of this webinar, we are only focusing on food safety. So we want to make sure that our general audit requirements for our food safety program are established. What is the scope? What are the requirements of that program? How are we going to manage the program? What's the management review process going to look like? And how are the corrective actions and follow-ups going to take place? Again, this is very large picture. This is the policy that we're going to have for internal auditing. As we define the objectives within that policy, we want to look at the most critical policies and procedures that we have under the umbrella of food safety. What KPIs are the drivers for those policies and performance standards that we need to have within the organization? And if we use any of the GFSI or AIB standards for food safety, we want to then have that actually becomes the foundation of our checklist for auditing. So all of these items come together. We have our policies, our procedures, our KPIs, and then any accreditations that we may have for our food safety program all play a factor in developing those objectives for our program. Now, once we begin looking at our audit program, we start focusing on the individual requirements. So again, we want to cover all programs and policies of our food safety system. We want to make sure it's planned and scheduled yearly. We want to make sure that we have the detailed reports and records of those audits maintained on file for checks and balances, as well as proof of demonstration. We want to make sure that our corrective actions are effective and that they do actually demonstrate continuous improvement. And another fundamental requirement is the communication with management. If we're not communicating the health of our system through auditing, then it becomes difficult for management to make the critical decisions that they need to have. Within the scope of our food safety systems, these are examples here on the screen of various programs that you may have within the food safety umbrella. So we have our HACCP plan, or in some areas of the world, it's called the food safety plan. We have our risk-based controls, so that could be OPRPs, it could be our CCPs, whatever controls that we may have. We have sanitation, we've got training, a very important aspect of our food safety programs, consumer complaints, supplier verification, environmental monitoring programs. Every one of these programs are criteria that should fall under the umbrella of our yearly schedule for auditing. Now, once we begin developing that schedule, as you can see over here on the right, now this is just an example, and it's definitely not inclusive of all elements within a food safety program, simply because it wouldn't fit on the slide. But if we begin to hone in on some of those concepts from the previous slide, we have GMP inspections. And as you can see, GMP inspections should probably be audited on a monthly event, because these are the actual practices that are taking place on the floor. It's our operational techniques, it's our environmental monitoring programs, it's our personnel, it's our maintenance programs. Then we can move into our important function, our HACCP plan, our food safety plan. And here we're saying that, for this particular organization, we're looking at maybe a quarterly audit. Maybe in the month of March, we're going to look at the raw materials that are outlined for risk in our HACCP plan. In June, we might be looking at the flow chart and identifying the hazards in each of those areas, whether it's micro, physical, or chemical hazards. Then we can move on into September, and maybe we're looking at our CCPs. And then in December, an example would be wrapping it all up and saying, do we have a good food safety plan built into our HACCP structure? And do we need to make any modifications based on our audit? And what does that look like? Then we have management review. Again, this is feeding information into the management review, but then also conducting the audit of the management review process. Is management review following up on the items that they have deemed as being important to food safety? Are we looking at food safety related complaints and auditing that system? So again, this is the example of an auditing schedule for each of these programs to ensure that our policies and procedures are delivering what we desire within the organization. When it comes time to actually performing an audit, I like to look at this slide as being the procedure within the program. So what is our focus on documentation versus the physical aspects of our facility or our sanitation conditions? Like I said before, we want to audit not only our documents, our records, but we also want to observe those GMP principles that are out in the production environment. Both scenarios, documentation as well as GMPs, require corrective actions. we need to identify who's responsible for those corrective actions. Is there planned completion? What's the verification? Has that verification been described as being effective? And then, of course, our documentation should align with our overall facility. So, for example, if we have a third-party audit come in and they have multiple non-conformances identified, are we identifying those same non-conformances in our internal programs? You know, I always determine the health of our organization by having more findings in our internal program than any third-party auditor could have when they come into our facility. Because if I knew about it before they did, then I knew that I was fixing it and I knew that our facility was running in a healthy environment. We also need to take a look at leadership involvement. Do we have the support of our supervisors in our upper management? Once we identify the procedure, then we can really start looking at the aspects of the individual audit that's going to take place on a specific day in time. What is the objective and the scope of that one individual audit? What is the plan for that audit? What's our sampling going to look like? How many records are we going to look at? What are the procedures we're going to look at? That becomes our sampling. We always want to make sure we have a good opening and closing meeting. In some environments, it may be a formal meeting. In other environments, it may be more of a casual setting. An example of that is when I was conducting corporate audits, I would have a more formal meeting because I was actually visiting a facility that I was not a part of. So I wanted to make sure I understood who the key members of that audit were going to be. But when I was actually working in a facility and I did my own internal audits within the scope of that one building or operation, I knew a lot of the supervisors or representatives of those departments, so it became a less formal environment. Always look at how you're going to collect and verify the information, and always write both the positive and the negative aspects found within an audit. And I cannot begin to stress positive as being very important. Management wants to know what's going right. A department wants to know what they're doing right. The organization needs to know what good looks like. And that's all identified within the audit. It should not always be a focus on the non-conformance. I mean, you know, our world has a tendency to focus on what is not good and positive. So we always want to make sure that when we stress the positive or we identify that positive, that people begin to understand what that looks like, and then they can drive in that direction. So again, we're looking for both the positive and the negative within an audit. Once we identify we have the evidence, we can draw on those, then we can define the conclusion of that audit for that time for that one day. What are the non-conformances and what are the conformances of that program? So let's take a break and have a polling question. The question for this poll is: a balanced audit plan for documentation review and floor time for observations cannot deviate from a 50-50 requirement. If you believe this is true, then please stay true. Or if you think it's false, please add a comment for what you believe should be a good balance between documentation versus floor time.
Okay, ladies and gents, I have set the poll in the sidebar. The question is: a balanced audit plan for documentation review and floor time for observations cannot deviate from the 50-50% requirement. So please vote on that. And also, if you believe it's false, well, what do you think a balanced audit plan looks like? So let's see. Hopefully you can see this, Alma Sue. At the moment, true is settling down about 40% and false 60%. And we get in the comments, varies depending on the facility, depends on the subject of the audit and the company. It is correct. Isn't it audit site driven? False, depends on the condition of the facility. Floor may be worse than docks. A good balance is whatever. My word, the comments are coming in too quick. Depends on. A lot of people are saying it depends on the facility and the scope of the audit, and perhaps the previous history of the company, previous findings, complexity of the documentation, size of the facility, etc. Complexity of probably the products and processes. So lots of different ideas, but in terms of the poll, true, we've got about a third, 34% saying true, 66% saying false. So what do you think, Almasu?
In my experience, I have to go with the 67% and say false. It really depends on what you're finding out on the floor. It depends on your documentation. Every scenario can be different, so you really need to customize that floor time versus documentation time based on the need and the risk. Remember, it's all based on risk. So risk is never going to be 50-50. So
Yeah.
that's how I like to look at it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think some GFSI standards, BRC, they actually mandate that you should spend more time on the shop floor rather than looking at documentation. Am I right in saying that? I vaguely remember that being.
Yeah, some of the standards say it should be a 50-50 split during
Right.
the third party audit, but again, internally you've got to look at the health of your organization
Yeah.
and what is that risk? Because at the end of the day, auditing is about risk mitigation. So, I've seen some where procedures are an absolute mess. So we spend a lot of time really working through that. In
Yeah.
other situations, um, there's a lot of opportunity out on the production floor. So again,
Yeah.
it's where it's needed.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. You can move on now, Almasu.
Thank you. So now what I would like to do is really begin. Well, let me see. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Now what I'd like to do is kind of transition a little bit and really start talking about your audit team. Um, in both the GFSI as well as that ISO 19011 standard, it identifies the basic criteria for an audit team. The individuals on the team need to have the appropriate education and training. They need to understand what is that HACCP plan, both from the principles aspect or the book theory aspect, as well as how is it applied to the facility. What are the prerequisite programs and how do they function in correspondence to that food safety plan? And if you are using a third party scheme or certification, you also want to incorporate that into your audit team's training portfolio, because they need to understand that foundation as well. You want them to have the audit team. You want them to have adequate experience to audit the areas that they're going to audit. So, for example, if you have an individual on the team who's going to go out and audit pest control, but they know nothing about pest control, something that you may do is actually have that individual work with your pest control provider a couple of weeks before the scheduled audit. That allows them to gain an understanding of what that provider does, what their function is, the importance behind it, and then it allows that individual to go back and really think about what they just learned and how what they learned by following the provider, that pest control provider, and how it relates to the overall program. So that's one example of gaining that experience. Excellent organizational skills. This could be from the team, but the manager or the organizer of the audit program really needs to be organized, because they need to be able to stay on top of the scheduling. They need to stay on top of management review. They need to stay on top of records that are provided and corrective actions. And if you have that organization built into the audit program and into the team, then it just increases the functionality and the overall performance of that internal audit team. You want people to have a proven competence within as an auditor. Now, this is something that does not happen overnight. And really, a competent auditor is someone who has training as well as experience. We can all go through training, but that doesn't mean we're going to walk out as an expert. It does take some time to develop those auditing competencies or skill sets that go with it. We also want an audit team or members of the audit team to have good communication skills. Are they able to write down their findings and communicate it so that someone else can read their reports? And there are formats and different ways that we can help identify better communication. So that's something that as a team lead, you can really look at and make sure that that communication, both written and oral, is done in a systematic manner so that it allows both sides to understand what is taking place within that audit. And the self-motivation and a dependable person on the team is also important. I have had people on audit teams who were very excited and eager to do their audits. They did them on time. They closed them out. I had the reports in a timely fashion. And then I've had those who were just not interested. And at the end of the day, those individuals who are not interested really just needed to leave the team, because that's really a driver of the performance of your team. And if they're not motivated, then they're not going to gain the skills or the competency to help drive that audit performance. So those are some of the items that we look at for the team. Now, when we start looking at auditor soft skills, I really like to look at this as an art. And the reason that I say an art is because everyone is right and everyone has an opinion. But how do you gain the respect of both the auditor and the auditee to where they can work in that cooperative environment within an organization? No one likes to be told that they're doing something wrong. So we don't want our audit program to be about personnel. We have human resources departments that handle personnel issues. We want our auditors to be focused on the facts and the processes and the procedures that are taking place within the organization. Again, we're looking at risk of our processes and our procedures. So that's where we need to focus. There are many times conflicts of interest from person to person, because either maybe there was a work conflict that took place at some point in time and there's a lack of trust, or maybe your best friend is working for the company in a different department and now you're scheduled to audit them. If you do have these type of personal relationships, whether good or positive, you may want to rethink how you approach these audits, because again, we want to gain the trust. We want to find the facts to drive the organization in a very good, strong, positive direction. So those auditor soft skills are very important. Another aspect of an auditor is to admit when they have identified something that may have been a misunderstanding on their part. So if they made a mistake during the audit, they need to be able to fess up to it and say, you know what, I made a mistake. This is how I understood it. Let me change my report. Let me modify what I have written, because at the end of the day, we don't want to misrepresent what the organization is doing and how they're doing it. And it's all about making people feel important and included. People typically show up to work to do a good job, and we want them to know they've done a good job. So that's why I say that soft skills is really an art. It takes development of charisma in order to do that. As we transition and look at auditing techniques, this is one where you can really have a lot of fun and bring variety into how you perform your audit. So let's look at audit trails as one example of what we're going to, of what I mean. So let's say that today you're going to go out and do an audit of the receiving department. And you're looking at the storage practices, the receiving procedures, the inspection of the trailers as they show up, and you identify that non-employed person roaming through your receiving department, checking out the warehouse. Maybe it's a truck driver who is interested in your business, and they just decided to go on a self tour. That's an audit trail where you can go and say, hey, have you signed in? Why are you here? Who are you here to visit? And not only does that help with your GMP aspects of visitors, but it also may help mitigate or reduce the risk of some type of food defense or food fraud opportunity. Asking the right type of questions is also very important during an audit. We definitely want to stay away from the yes/no type of questions and really focus on asking individuals to explain what you do. When do you do it? How do you do it? Where do you document this? If something happens that is an unusual event, who do you notify, and how do you put products on hold, or how do you contain that particular event from becoming bigger than what it needs to? Um, so again, proper questions. Then we can also look at a process approach. The process approach is one that I really like to use when I go to another site. Because typically, when I was in the corporate world and I went to a sister site, um, I may only have 5 days to do an audit from the corporate perspective. So I like to do it based on a traceability exercise. So I will identify a freshly made product and ask the organization to do a complete um, collection of all documents related to that product. So every ingredient that was received, every inspection or micro test that was conducted on those raw materials, all of the trailer inspections, all of the warehouse inspections, any type of maintenance that may have occurred on the equipment, what were the sanitation checks that were involved with the equipment, what was the CIP cycles, what was the formulation that was used, were there any products that were deemed as being possibly on hold or may have had alterations made to them used in these formulas? Were there what were the end results? What were the CCP readings from the HACCP program? And I'll do a snapshot in time based on a product. Now, the reason I say a new product is because I want to make sure it has not left our building in our control, because you never know what you may find, and it may result in a root cause investigation if something funny was identified in the records. So you want to make sure you can still contain that product and you have it. So that's what I call that process approach. And with that, you can have systematic questioning. So what do you do if this or that happens? It also looks at tracking activities that result from the audit. Interviewing people also becomes key to any audit process or audit trail that we use. And always document the observations, or even collect photocopies or photographs of the observations, because then it becomes useful for later on in identifying how we're going to make the corrective actions. Excuse me. It also gives, if you take photos of the good things, it also gives the organization an opportunity to identify what has really been good within the organization. As we move to the thought process behind developing the scope of an audit, uh, we want to look at what are we going to observe. Again, this is that individual audit. So what is your individual audit checklist? What are those individual procedures? And what are the work practices that you want to identify? Once you identify that checklist, procedure, work practices, then you can begin to develop what kind of questions you want to ask. What is the plan of approach for this particular audit? Are you going to do an audit trail, or are you going to do a systematic audit? And then always focus on what is important to the organization. Maybe you're doing maybe you have a focus because you've had a customer complaint, or maybe there's been significant downtime on a piece of equipment. So now that's important to the operation, and you want to make sure that you focus on what's important and not the stuff that just gets you bogged down in the weeds. We're always going to have the important versus the not so important. So always make sure you go in the direction of importance, because it makes you more efficient and effective as an audit team. Roles and responsibilities during an audit are also very important. You always want to make sure that everyone understands what the objective is for that day's audit. Uh, who are the people that need to be audited? You always want to provide advance notice because they want to be prepared. A department wants to put their best effort forward, so give them that opportunity to prepare the records. It also saves the auditor a significant amount of time because now they don't have to wait for the records that they need. They don't have to wait on someone to have someone replace them on an operation line, so that they can do your interviews. And then always try to stay on track. It's very easy to meet a buddy and begin talking about last night's game that was televised on maybe it was a soccer game or a football game or whatever. Always try to stay focused on the task at hand. It creates efficiencies, and it just maintains a higher level of professionalism. Now, don't get me wrong, it is good to have the social environment because it helps calm nerves, but always try to keep it focused and on track. Something else that's very important for an auditor is to make sure you adhere to the safety rules and the dmps. The last thing we want is for our role as an auditor to be looked down upon because we're auditing rules that we don't follow. So always incorporate that into the aspect of the auditor. And then something else to keep in mind is that if you do visit another facility for an internal audit within your organization, try to make sure that your guide or your escort within that facility is not the primary person answering the questions. Now, this may be difficult if you're going to another country or you may not speak the native language. So you may have to have an interpreter, but always make sure that that interpreter is working with the individual who actually performs the task or is responsible for that particular procedure. And as we go out and we start collecting the information, we always want to make sure that we focus on objective facts. When we stick to the facts, it becomes less subjective, and then we have a foundation for proving or disproving conformance. Uh, Always have multiple interviews over a topic. You might want to interview first shift and second shift. You might want to interview two separate receiving clerks to make sure that they're both doing completing the paperwork in the same manner. Look at records, multiple records, because you want to make sure that from day to day, the records are being completed in the same format, and using the same techniques. And after you collect all this information, you want to make sure you have a combination of policy and procedure, work practices, as well as those interviews confirming what you have identified within the concept of fact finding. Now, once we conclude the individual audit for that day, we want to take the observations, whether it's methods, records, interviews, observations from the production floor, and combine that with our facts. Our facts become our evidence, and evidence can be collected in the form of photocopies of records. It could be photographs that were taken on the production floor. It could be a photograph of a record. And we want to use that as our verifiable information to confirm the outcome of that audit for that day. We also want to take those facts and that evidence and compare it to the KPIs. are we performing within the scope of our desired management's goals and requirements for our organization? And then what is the outcome of the conformance and the non-conformance? Do we have critical findings or minor findings? Do we have no findings, which means that we're definitely conforming? So we look at the observations, the collection of facts, we analyze it, and then we come up with our finding. And that is the completed cycle for that 1 day's opportunity in the audit dynamics. So now we have another polling question. So true or false? Interviewing multiple individuals during an audit is an excellent way to see if they understand their activity. So again, just like the last time, if you say true or false, please provide a comment to help support your opinion of true or false.
Okay, yes, I've set the poll live in the sidebar. The question, interviewing multiple individuals during an audit is an excellent way to see if they understand their activity. And as Almasu requested, if you could just comment either way, whether you voted true or false, just put something in to back up your answer. And I can say 99% are saying true and 1% false. And in the comments, I don't know who said false, so it's impossible to say. More people you interview, you can gauge whether training has been understood and effective, helps you verify training is working, identifies training needs. There's a lot to do with training. More interview, more evidence, also indicator of training effectiveness. The more peeps you interview, the better you understand if they are competent to do their job. Gives a better understanding about the level of knowledge across all staff. I suppose it's like with any survey, isn't it, that you're more confident in the answers if you get a wider spread.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I noticed that a lot of the comments were based on training of staff. Mm-hmm. Something that you might also consider is whether or not that procedure is written adequately. Because we always want to go back to training. Training seems to be the end all be all to our staff, but sometimes the operation, sometimes it could be the material, sometimes it could be the procedure, the method. These are also things to take a look at when you're interviewing the staff. It's not always about the training. Sometimes there's other opportunities to look outside of just training.
So somebody's also commented, I think it's Tammy, so sometimes people have come up with a best practice that's different than what is written. So somebody has gone outside the SOP, standard operating procedure, and actually there's a best practice there. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, you're free to move on, Almasu.
All right, thank you. So now that we have concluded our one day audit, or our plan for our little experience out on the floor, now we're going to take a look at the corrective actions. And there's really four elements within a corrective action. There's the immediate action. If you've identified a CCP that went wrong out on the floor, you want to make sure you have the correction, which is you put product on hold. Because you don't want it to go anywhere. As you know, a CCP, that is your critical control point. You've got to stop it because we're saying that there is an opportunity. Our risk is high. Then we want to begin to really correct the problem and determine what the root cause is. Once we are able to determine that root cause, we can fix it. Now we can go back and we can say, okay, let's reanalyze, let's retest that product that failed that CCP to determine, is it really a product failure or was it a system failure? So again, that is part of that holistic corrective action. There's the immediate action, and then there is the permanent fix to what went wrong. In the auditing environment, we have the auditing corrective actions. So these are the non-conformances. It could also be customer complaints that were identified. We want to go and collect and identify what the root cause, the action plan, and the closure to that plan was. So again, this is part of that audit process. Did we close out those corrective actions? And then when we go back and we re-audit that area, we want to verify that there was closure to that problem and that it did not reoccur. Sometimes we have non-conformances that have multiple reasons for being a non-conformance, and we only identified one of them. So again, that's why it's very important to look at verified closure. As we begin to collect all these elements, both the audit for today, those corrective actions, any other audits that were conducted, we want to take all these individual audit findings and put them into a summary report. Now, that summary report can be conducted on a quarterly basis. It could be every 6 months. It could be a yearly report. That really depends on the structure of your organization. There isn't any solid, concrete, definitive that says you must do it at this set time frame. Everything is based on the risk and the type of operation that you have. Once you have that summary report, then that is your opportunity to provide it as an input to the management review process. So the management review process is really there to help you understand. It helps management understand what their overall performance and trends are of the food safety program. The management review process should not only look at the audit process, that's one key input, but it's going to look at individual components of the food safety plan as well. It should look at the HACCP plan and other aspects, not just the audit findings, but like I said, audit findings is very important for the management review process. It allows for opportunities of continual improvement. It's monitoring our objectives for our food safety program, and all of our results for any of our regularly reported management review meetings should always be documented, because at the end, it really does hone in on risk mitigation. And our management team is the source that can provide you with the resources that are needed to alleviate any of those risks that we have. And that's where the audit summary report becomes a critical aspect to that management review process. So if we look at the management review cycle, we also have auditing of the management review to ensure that they have closure to their findings. So let's say that we're going to audit the management review process, and it's scheduled once every 3 to 4 months, whatever we see as being the risk. We want to then look at, did they evaluate the report summary that went into the management review committee? What were the discussion or the action points based on that summary report? Was it provided to the audit team, and did the audit team then close out their activities? And this one's a little bit tricky because we also have to have independence. So we have to have an auditor who's independent from the management review cycle. So sometimes this could be a collector, a couple of auditors taking a look at it from different perspectives. Or you may borrow someone from another audit team to say, hey, can you review our management review process to see if it is working and it is functioning in the way it should. But again, management review has two key components within the auditing cycle. One is taking actions from the audit and doing something with it. The second element is auditing the management review process to ensure that the management review process is operating to help with the overall audit process. So this leads us to our final polling question. Management review is a risk mitigation process that only focuses on industry trends. Again, true, false. So provide your comment. for this particular question or statement?
Yeah, the final poll is live in the sidebar. Management review is a risk mitigation process that only focuses on industry trends, true or false. And back up your comment in the sidebar to what you believe the purpose of a management review is. And so far, it's highly in favour of false, and 96% are disagreeing that management review is only focuses on industry trends. And in the sidebar, should take into account anything pertinent focused on your organisation to verify your entire food safety quality system, should incorporate company-specific issues, look at both inside and outside for risks and opportunities, focus on changes that will affect your business and prepare for the future, includes regulatory and continual improvement, focus on the quality system and the processes in place, measures of KPIs, trends, implementation of the food safety system. So obviously a lot more on the agenda of those management reviews than Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Industry trends should definitely be included in the management review, because that's where you look at the risk of your product. Was there a recall from another organization with a similar product that you make? Are there new sciences out there to help you understand how you can control risk within your organization? So it's important, but it's not the only item that you discuss in a management review process.
Okay, on that, you can continue, Sue.
All right. So this really leads us to the conclusion of this particular webinar. And just in an overview, if we look at the ISO 19011 and combine that with our GFSI standards, that really brings us to the foundation of an internal auditing program and how to structure our internal auditing program based on fitness for use or industry best practice for that particular program. I reviewed some basic elements within the internal auditing program itself, and then we also took the outcome of an audit and we linked that back into the corrective actions and the management review program. Both the corrective actions in that management review program are very instrumental in mitigating the risk within our organization. So Simon, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Fantastic. That was really good presentation and lots of great comments and questions in the sidebar. We will spend a few minutes taking some questions. If you did type a question in, if you could just retype it in, because there has been that many comments, it'll have disappeared a few 100 feet underground. So any questions while we've still got Alma Sue here? How do you engage senior management in the importance of internal audits? And that's from Dawn.
How do we engage senior management in the importance? Really, it's going back and finding out what's important to them. What are their hot spots? How does that auditing process confirm or deny what they already know about the organization? So it's very important to create a liaison and a cooperation with senior management, because you want to be able to deliver information that's important for them so that they can make decisions.
Yeah, I suppose things that add value to the business as well, whether that's saving waste, money, complaints, failures, even avoiding risks to recalls and things, wherever you can make it tangible and even financial, speak their language. Kate, how often do internal auditors need to be trained on internal auditing? Yearly?
It's really going to depend on the skill set of that auditor. So yes, there should always be continuous training. We always want to make sure that we have fresh and new knowledge, maybe concepts, but we may have an auditor who is very skilled and very experienced. They may not need as much training, and they might actually be a trainer within the audit team. At the same time, you may have someone who is a little bit newer to the audit program, so they may need a little bit of coaching or one-on-one mentoring to guide them through that process. Okay. So formally, yes, always have a set program. You define that, but then informally, you may need a little extra.
Okay. He's asking slightly off topic. Well, no, what is a qualified internal auditor, PCQI, SQF practitioner?
Okay, so if we go back and we look at the PCQI internal auditor based on the FSMA requirements, this is going to be based on education, experience, and there's another component, education, experience, and knowledge of their ability to do that job. And then you define that within your organization and you make sure you check off what that means. You can also go onto the FDA website and look at the criteria that has been established for an internal auditor, but you really want somebody who understands the industry. You don't want to pull somebody out from aerospace to come do a food safety inspection. You want somebody who really understands what is to take place within the scope of food safety. And earlier in the slide, I looked at, you want to know what the prerequisite programs are, you want to understand HACCP, and you want to understand how all of them link into your overall programs.
Okay, great. Colin's asking about audit frequency. Is monthly too much? I know it depends on the risk, but would quarterly or twice a year be a good start?
It depends on how you set up your audit program and how you define it. So yes, I've been in situations where we only do audits every 6 months, and I've also set it up to where we do them every month. It's going to depend on the number of resources that you have, the type of organization that you run, and how you lay it out. So you could do an audit day where you have 5 team members who go out and audit different processes, and it's more of that one day is focused and you do it one day a quarter, or you could have it set up to where it's once a month and an individual may go out and do a particular area. Again, it's got to work for your organization, and that's the critical aspect.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Kaylee, which seems to be she's a new auditor and she's struggling with senior production staff who do not want to cooperate. Any advice?
Spend some time, one-on-one time without auditing with these individuals. So, see if you can get some free time to go out and work with them, and talk to them. They're afraid that you're out there and you're going to call them out for what they're doing wrong, or that you're going to disrupt their workflow. So as you go out there and you describe to them what you're looking for and you become interested in what they're doing, that helps create that coercion and that cooperation between the two groups. They want to know that you're on their side.
Yeah. Susan, what do you suggest for training individuals? We are BRC certified.
Can you repeat that one again? I want to make sure I...
Yeah. What training do you suggest for individuals?
There's a lot of great resources online that can identify different types of auditing processes or how to go about auditing. There's also one-on-one coaching that says, you want to look at this or this. Something that I really like to do is when I had an auditor who was struggling from an internal concept or from the internal approach, I would ask them to shadow a third-party auditor when they came in. It could be a customer, it could be that certification body, but I asked them to begin participating as an observer in that audit so that they could see what happens during that process.
Yeah, you can't beat that kind of experience. Okay, I think any final questions before Almasu has to go? Mohammed, what is the difference between critical and major non-conformance?
That has to be defined by your organization. So I wish I could give you a straightforward answer, but it goes back to what, like at the very beginning, I asked the questions: what is your product? Who are your consumers? What is the industry risk? All of those items need to play a factor in how you describe your critical and your minor nonconformances. If you have a product that is high on the microbial list, then environmental monitoring and microbial sampling might be a major factor. If it's not being done, that could be considered a major or a critical nonconformance. Something minor in that sense might be maybe the exterior grounds. It really depends on your organization and what the risk is to your product.
Okay.
I wish I could have a solid answer, but every industry is different.
Yeah, and someone's asking specifically about AIB. It's okay. Yeah, where can we get certification or training from AIB?
You can go to aibonline.org, and that website can point you in the direction. We have a couple of different standards that we use. So we have a distribution center standard. We've got a food safety prerequisite standard. We have a beverage standard, for example. So all of these standards are available to you online through a PDF, and we also have phone numbers or email addresses where you can reach out to our staff and they can help assist you in that area.
What I'll do is I send a follow-up email with the webinar recording slides, etc. So I'll put some links in, the direct links in that email to resources on the AIB site. So if anybody's interested, I think on that note, what we'll do is, if any more questions come in, we'll collate them all and we'll pick them up perhaps later. But for now, I'd just like to say thanks very much, Alma Sue. It's been a fantastic, great feedback. We've actually broken a record here today. 2,306 registered and over 600 joining live. So you've broke a record, and it was a presentation that was well worthy of breaking a record. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I like to break records. That's always a good thing. So I'm glad I could be a part of that.
Great. All right. Thanks, Alma Sue. We'll be in touch. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so that's Alma Sue Hajduk from AIB International. Fantastic presentation. Next week, we've got Amanda Evans with how to avoid stupid audit non-conformances. Well, one way to avoid stupid audit non-conformances is to have a good internal audit program, and so that you find them first. But for now, I'll deliver the certificate in the sidebar. I've loaded that now, so you can download that. I'll see you next Friday. We'll be sending an email with a follow-up so you can grab everything. Thanks for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.